In the last video, you learned about 3 important questions to ask yourself that can uncover your best stories. Again, those questions were, who are you? What are you about? And where did you learn that? In this video, you'll learn about a very useful tool that can help you organize your stories so they're readily available if you need to create a story on the fly or a speech on the fly, or if you want to upgrade a speech you're working on because it's getting a little bit stale. Hi, I'm Michael Davis of Speaking CPR. One of the most valuable tools I have, and that has worked for my clients, is a story file. This is a file that's organized in 5 different columns, and it can help you, as I mentioned earlier, find stories very quickly if you have a short-term presentation you have to give, or if you want to spice up some material that's just feeling a little bit stale. So the 5 columns that I've created in my story file are: number 1, the lesson column. These are the important life lessons you've learned. This goes back to question number 2, what are you about? So create a column that puts that describes what the important lessons are that you've learned. It could be something like, don't steal, be persistent in your work, be accountable. Whatever that lesson is, just put that down. In the second column, that's your story column. What stories represent the lessons that you've learned? For example, if the lesson in column 1 was be persistent, what are some stories from your background that illustrate that? The third column you should create is what I call the emotion column. This just simply describes the emotions that are generated by your story. Now, by emotion, I don't mean that it has to be a tearjerker or uproarious laughter. There are many emotions that a story can stir. For example, if you're talking about persistence, it could be pride, or it could be a feeling of dependability. Just create or describe the emotions that are created by your story. In column 4, list your characters. Now, the most obvious characters are you, the other people involved with your story, but it could also be non-human characters. For example, I was sharing a presentation today with a group, and I showed an American Express commercial. Well, the key character in that commercial was the American Express card. It created a change in the lead character. So perhaps your characters could be a story that you read in a book, a lesson you learned from a movie. Most likely it will be people, but expand your thinking. Characters can be non-human. So those are your first 4 columns: the lessons, the stories, the emotions, and the characters. The 5th column is really the most important when it comes to the appeal to the audience, and that is the change that was involved with your story. See, a great story isn't great until you show a change in the characters. In my financial planning business, I used to tell the story of a client named Judy. And it's really what I call a parallel story, because Judy had gone through the unexpected loss of her husband, and the story is about me handing her a large life insurance check that completely changed her perspective on her financial world. It also changed my perspective, because up until that moment, I really hated selling life insurance. I was embarrassed by it. I fell into all the common misconceptions and myths about insurance people and the stereotypes. And until I saw the impact that check had on her, I had a very negative opinion. But that check changed my perspective in her life. The follow-up to that story is that she had a great, her business ran well. I mean, she went through a grieving period, losing her husband, but her business survived and thrived. And I helped many more people after that because I was willing to talk about insurance. Now, your story may not be as dramatic as handing a grieving widow a huge insurance check, but it does need to illustrate the change in the characters. Ultimately, we should tell our stories to change the way people think, feel, or act. So put that in the column. So those are your 5 columns, and that's your story file. I encourage you to start the habit of writing down, hopefully every day, stories that come to you. You'll experience stories throughout your day, and also old stories will come back to you. Just this week, I added 2 stories to my file about something that happened to me as a kid that I just set aside and forgotten. But the memory was triggered. There's a reason you remember these stories. Now, the truth is, most of them will probably never show up in your speeches, your presentations, and that's okay. You want to create this file, this habit, so that you have a bank of stories to go to the next time you give a presentation or give a speech. Until next time, when we'll talk about the 6 common emotions, always remember, you have a story that someone needs to hear. Tell that story well, and you'll impact more lives than you can ever imagine.